O Grupo Energy Telecom, através de suas 4 empresas, atua em todo o Brasil, integrando os principais serviços e soluções quando pensamos em tecnologia. Projetos de Public Cloud, comunicação unificada, Big Data, infraestrutura, Data Center, Client License, Cybersecurity e educação. Você pode contar com o Grupo Energy Telecom. Sempre a melhor solução.
Nós protegemos a tecnologia para você explorar novas realidades. Fazer o que quiser, quando quiser. Fazer amigos virtuais. Estar perto, mesmo estando longe. E conquistar novas fronteiras. Garantimos sua segurança digital para um futuro melhor. Kaspersky. Bring on the future.
Vale do Paraíba, uma região única com múltiplas vocações. A nossa é a tecnologia, é a inovação. Nós somos a NIP-BR. Trabalhamos para integrar, conectar, expandir, informar, entreter. A NIP-BR é solução corporativa, é internet, TV por assinatura, é telefonia digital. Os melhores serviços com o melhor custo-benefício. NIP-BR, sua melhor opção em internet, telefonia e TV por assinatura.
Você é daqueles que acham que ser moderno é ter um aplicativo para cuidar do seu dinheiro? É também. Agora, moderno mesmo é fazer parte de um grupo de pessoas que cooperam e crescem juntas.
Tem gente que acha que um bom atendimento é ter um gerente pronto para te ajudar. Nada mal, né? Mas pra gente ter voz e participar das decisões relacionadas ao nosso dinheiro.
Tem gente que acha que somos um banco. Somos muito mais. Somos feitos de valores.
Our infrastructure and natural resources can't keep up with growing demands. We need to be smarter. We need to care more. It's time to create smart infrastructure. We can because we connect energy systems, buildings, and industries to adapt and evolve the way we live and work for the good of the planet and the people. Creating environments that care. Smart infrastructure from Siemens.
A maior rede de pesquisas do mundo, com 5,5 bilhões de acessos por dia. Uma rede social avaliada em 70,7 milhões. Sabe qual a semelhança entre essas empresas? O investimento em softwares e algoritmos inteligentes. Tinova e SPS.
Na era da transformação digital, a Tria Software é o seu parceiro ideal. Trabalhamos com a aplicação de solução em software padronizada ou sob medida para melhorar o desempenho dos processos de sua empresa. Tria Software.
Bem-vindos de volta à transmissão da 7ª RM Vale TI e também do Fórum da Indústria Espacial Brasileira. Vou passar para vocês quais serão os nossos painéis desta tarde. Agora, às 2 horas, nós vamos ter o último painel do Fórum Espacial sobre financiamento no setor espacial. Às 13h15, voltamos com a programação do Congresso. Vamos falar sobre soluções para os serviços públicos e, por fim, às 4h30, sobre conectividade nas cidades inteligentes. Todos os nossos painéis têm duração de 1 hora e você pode conversar com a gente enviando comentários aí no player da sua plataforma. Lembrando que as palestras do Fórum são em inglês e, se você precisar, você pode ativar a tradução simultânea nesse ícone acima aqui na parte superior da plataforma, esse ícone do globinho, ok? Vamos então para o último painel do Fórum. A programação do Fórum volta amanhã e nós seguimos após esse painel com a programação do Congresso. Vamos aqui chamar os nossos palestrantes, ó, já estão todos posicionados, né? Essa palestra em inglês, então lembre-se de ativar a tradução simultânea se você precisar, é sobre o financiamento das atividades espaciais e o moderador já está ali posicionado, Rafael Hetkin, da I2MC. Boa tarde, Rafael.
Boa tarde, como vai?
Vamos seguir então, por favor,
Bom,
pode começar o painel.
Vamos lá, boa tarde, Brasil. Good evening from Europe. This panel vai ser in English. This panel will be in English. This is the panel on financing space activities. This is obviously an important topic. One thing that the reusable rocket technology has done is it has brought down costs so much that suddenly a whole lot of businesses are possible in space that had never been possible. And so there are startups coming up, space startups left and right. In our internal database in my company, we have about 2,000 space startups right now. Now, all of these startups, they need financing. That can be from public money, so in the form of grants or even equity investing. And I'm very happy that we have 3 panelists here who are associated with space agencies, or I suppose it can be private money as well from people like myself through my venture capital firm, E2MC. So let's jump right into it. We have 4, I hope 4 in the end, fantastic panelists. We have Maxime Poutot from Euroconsult. We have my friend Frank Salzgeber from the ESA, the European Space Agency, who I think is coming on as we speak. We have Angelina Emerkov from the Canadian Space Agency. And we have my friend Sarah Fleischer from LSA, the Luxembourg Space Agency. We'll start with Maxime. Quickly introduce yourself and go for it.
Thank you, Raphael. I'm Maxime Poutot. I'm Principal Advisor at Euroconsult. We are a boutique firm consulting company providing services to the satellite industry and user community, and I take part of consulting mission regarding upstream activities and financing. So what we have seen from Euroconsult point of view is a continuous growth of fundraising over the last few months, despite COVID-19. You can read here at different total regarding funding raised by space companies. With our internal definition, we estimate that around $5 billion were raised since January 1st, which is quite surprising and good news for the industry. Despite this COVID-19 crisis, people are looking through and beyond the pandemics and its impact on the economy. Quite a good number of deals, around 75. With an interesting distribution, with launches, and few companies actually are still concentrating some activities. For example, SpaceX raising $1.9 billion in a Series N, still raising capital for Starlink and its Starship launcher. And on the other end, you have few companies raising a few million as a kickstart. So despite pandemics, there are still several fundraising going on and roundtable being secured. What is interesting, we see a little bit of shortage in early stage activities. We see less deal, as if investors were like securing their existing portfolio and strengthening their company rather than investing in new companies. It's interesting. It looks to be like a protective position. And it's actually makes sense for them when they are facing significant ups and downs in market volatility. Again, launch concentration looks quite interesting. Maybe higher than what the demand can actually absorb. On the other end, we see a new fundraising for interesting project like Earth observation. It's no longer about multispectral. You have star companies still raising money, like ISI is now up to 150 million. You have GHGSat for greenhouse gas monitoring. You have in-orbit servicing also, which with like Astroscale still raising money for new business like active debris removal. So far, not a bad year for space capital, but still some deadline for the most advanced one, like with delivering return on investment for the most advanced one, and for the less mature, we say like need to validate the proof of concept with sometime quite bold, like meeting in-orbit rendezvous with non-comparative assets or demonstrating new thrusters or robotic assembly. So definitely an interesting year for the satellite industry and for venture capital.
Thank you, Maxime. And I agree with you. It's been actually a very good year for private space financing, private and public, to be honest, despite COVID. And so that's very exciting. We wish some more money would flow to Latin America, but we shall talk about that. Now, I think Frank Salzgeber hasn't joined us yet, so let's move on with Angelina Ermakov from the Canadian Space Agency. Angelina, please introduce yourself and you can go ahead with your remarks.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon from Ottawa, Ontario. As you probably know, that Canadian Space Agency is based in Montreal, but I happen to be in Ottawa with the President's office here. It's my pleasure and my honor to be here. It's my first time presenting to the Brazilian space industry, and that is continuation of our efforts of building the industry-to-industry relations stemming from last year's Brazilian industry visit to Canada. So I'm the head of the Industry Relations Group here at the CSA, and our specific mandate is to look into the needs of the Canadian space industry and to adjust government decision-making to make sure that we are in line with the industry needs. So our first and most important job is to listen to the industry and to the investors and to find out what are the key challenges of the day, how we can help with the industry, with the government programming, and also to help our industry to build business connections, to find potential commercial partners, to introduce our industry to foreign export markets, and to welcome interested partners to Canada and to find opportunities here in Canada. So this is the perspective from which we work with the industry. And I think that the key ingredient to successful work of any government with its domestic industry is this open dialogue and ability to hear each other and ability to be flexible and to adjust programs and incentives how the moment requires it. And the moment always changes. So I'm looking forward to present my presentation when the time comes. So I'm presenting right now? Oh, good. So I will leave you with these few numbers of how Canada is doing during the COVID-19 crisis. I understand that everyone will have a presentation, so I'm not going to focus here. The key message is that we are open for business. And every Canadian company is currently looking to find new partners and to build new businesses. Next slide, please. So this is a very interesting picture of our building in Montreal that was specifically built to look like a spaceship, and you can see it right here. So our newly appointed president, Lisa Campbell, heads the team of 650 employees. About 600 of them are scientists and engineers with PhDs in rocket science, literally. And we focus on the key activities of working on the International Space Station with other international partners, developing the future lunar gateway that will be going around the moon on the lunar orbit. Of course, we're working on the Earth observation projects, and our key project is the RadarSat constellation mission that was launched last year. And we have a number of programs that support the research and development with the private industry and academia, and I'll talk about them a little bit later. Next slide, please. So I have to mention here our space strategy, and I welcome you to look it up online. But the key ingredient to this strategy and to the successful launch of the strategy is collaboration with all of the other government departments. So what is important, that we are looking at the space not as a separate domain where one national space agency is doing certain type of work. We're looking at space as a provider of solutions for various problems and various mandates that all of the government departments have to deliver. So from that perspective, we work with 14 government departments, and we adjust what we do in terms of helping them to deliver their jobs. Next slide, please. So specifically, these are some of the examples where the Earth observation products help. And this is how we make sure that our government at large delivers all of the mandates and all of the jobs that we need to deliver in a more efficient, more productive, and cheaper way. So, and this is what sells the space to the government and to the investors, because we see how the space solutions are being actually employed and do not remain as toys for big boys, as some of the people call sometimes space projects. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of our industry. I will leave you with all of these numbers. What is important to see here is that 94% of Canadian space industry are small and medium enterprises. So these are the most vulnerable companies that need the most help and the most support from any government in terms of growing into the commercially viable enterprises. And in terms of the investments into space, the very important number is this return on investment multiplier that you see there. So essentially what it means that every dollar invested into the research and development activities in the Space Center will bring 11 times the investment. So this type of ROI is not achievable in any other industry but space. And this is one of the most important ingredients in the successful formula of developing an investment portfolio or investment approach, why the investor will be or should be looking into investing into space. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, this is what our group does, and this is where we focus our efforts. The group is very new to the Canadian Space Agency, and we are only 4 years old. And the industry has appreciated so much that the Canadian Space Agency now has a dedicated window that talks to the industry, that listens to their questions, and that helps them with their business needs and with their views in terms of how the national space strategy should be shaped and delivered. So one of the key messages that I want to leave with everyone today, that the first step in working successfully with the industry and helping it is talking to them and having this open dialogue and ensuring that everyone in the domestic space industry knows about people who work within the government for them. Next slide, please. So now the key question that we wanted to discuss today, financing the space sector. So what we're trying to do globally is to walk away from the previous model where the space companies were fully financed by governments towards the model where every space company becomes a commercially viable enterprise that exists because of its clientele, because of demand, because of the product and services that we sell, and not because of the government support that is being provided to them. With all of that in mind, of course, every space agency keeps a number of programs that support the growth of the space industry. The important part here is that we support the growth of the companies at the technology readiness level 1 and 2. So this is where the bright idea is becoming an idea for a business. So that's why we keep the number of programs that on continuous level support those companies. All of these programs are competitive in nature, and companies apply for that, and we pick and choose the best companies and the best value proposition for the money, and that's how we support them. We never grow the companies to the level of TRL 9, so essentially that is the commercially viable product, but we probably grow them from 1, 2 into the TRL level 3, 4, 5. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned before, we're changing from the government-financed model into the private investments. So the key question would be here to look at the question of investments in space from the perspective of the investor. So last year, CSA conducted the first time ever investment space event for our investment industry and space industry, essentially bringing these two industries to the same table and opening the conversation and introducing one industry to the other. So this is where we have a leadership role, and we didn't want to leave our small startups on their own, where they have to go and search for an investor and do the investment pitch and do all of the things that every startup does in terms of finding its around A financing. So we wanted to help them. And through this dialogue, we found out that the most important question is to look at space from the perspective of the investor. And the questions are standard for any investment firm, for any investment decision. The first and most important one is the product market fit. Essentially, if it's the right place for the right product at the right price. Can we give very specific examples of such products that have been delivered due to space-based solutions? And yes, the answer is we can show and demonstrate so many industries where space-based solutions make a huge difference. Of course, first and foremost is agriculture. Precision agriculture is known everywhere in the world, how the crops are increased and the costs of operations are decreased due to the implementation of space-based solutions, Earth observation solutions. Then we worked with the crop insurance industry, where again, the cost of the insurance is greatly reduced because now we can see how what are the effects of certain disasters, and it's very, very precise because it's based on the satellite image. And we're working with all of these other industries that I'm mentioning here. I also would like to make sure that we speak about the long-term demand. So I'm giving you here 3 examples. All of these examples, in terms of macroeconomics, are normal goods, basically meaning that the demand for these goods grows with the demand of consumer income. So you can see that Earth observation-based applications grow every day. And that is a very good message to give to any investor, why they should be investing into this. Remote medicine grows again every day with development of the new applications based on space robotics. And of course, advanced manufacturing is being used in a multitude of industries and basically makes those products better, cheaper, and more efficient and more accessible to the general public. And the last question, this is where the government agencies step in with the specific help that should be tailored to the solutions and to the challenges that the industry is telling us about. So any government has essentially 2 ways of providing incentives. So that would be the government spending, and that is reflected in the programs that support research and development for the early stages of technology readiness levels, as I mentioned before. And the other part is taxation regimes. So taxation regimes in Canada specifically, we're very proud to say that since 2000, when we had a tax rate of 44% for the new investments and for new startups, today we came to one of the lowest in the G7 countries tax rate for the new startups. So we are at 13%. And we're at much lower percentage, I think 3.7% for manufacturing sector. So these are the specific tools that government can offer to the investors to show to them how we can support the shift in investments from the traditional industries into the space industry, with a full understanding that space industry is long-term, is very complex, carries a lot of risks, but it also brings a lot of benefits and it brings a very, very high return on investment. So that is the key ingredient in my mind to have this conversation open and to ask those questions and to be able for the governmental agency to look at the problem from the investor's perspective. So that's how we can find common solutions, and that's how we can start working together. We are in the very, very early stages of this work with investment community in Canada, but we're open to suggestions from them, and we're open to help them and the Canadian space industry. So that was the last slide, and please follow up with myself or with our trade commissioner in Brazil. Alex Krell is present in this conference, and he will be able to help you, and I will be very happy to work with anyone from Brazil who is interested to invest in Canadian companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelina. And Frank, I think, is on now. Hi, Frank. Good to see you. Sometimes feels like I see you.
Sorry for being late. Hi.
No problem. Frank, since it was already supposed to be your turn, now will be your turn. So please jump right in.
So I try to, you see my presentation? Let me see. There is a trick maybe. Otherwise, maybe you have to start it because there's so many different. Okay, if you can just put it online, that would be great. I have no clue how to share that with this application. Can you do that for me? Perfect. All right, thank you and welcome to the space solution, to the part of the European Space Agency. You see a couple of flags below, which makes us, I think, pretty unique. My name is Frank Salzgeber. I'm head of innovation and venture office at the European Space Agency, which is a multi-governmental organization. So Canada is an associated member state. One flag is missing, is with Lithuania, which just was becoming a corporate state. And together we try to build and shape the space industry and the environment. Myself, I'm not a space engineer. I'm an industrial engineer. I've worked for Apple Computer, had my own startup company. And now I'm tackling an area which was familiar to me, which is about innovation and ventures. Next slide, please. And I thought about very long and very short, what is the best advice I can give my colleagues in Brazil? And we're supporting tech transfer since about 28 years, and we're supporting startups, also space-related startups, since over 16 years. And one of the lessons learned is that you have to support the entire funnel. And this is the advice also when you construct something. You don't have to do everything by yourself, but you need a partner who's taking care of all of the areas. So we start with TRL 0 until TRL 9. You have to cover everything, or at least you have a partner who's doing that. So in the early detections, and this is something also our colleagues in Brazil can join, is Act in Space, which is an international cooperation and a competition, what you can do with space, which is pushed by our colleagues in France, by CNES, with the support of ESA. But there are many other competitions. The Galileo Master competition, which is about navigation, inner space, what you can do and spinning into space. Copernicus Master, which is what you can do with Earth observation. And our job is to bring these new ideas and also new players, making business cases out that, helping that with business incubation, which I come to in a second, but also accelerate it, but also having the acceleration of SMEs which using space technology, which is a sister program in our department doing, which calls business application. And we even help with the international scale. And one thing you always have to take that we don't speak about software. Next slide, please. We speak about hardware. We speak about something complex stuff. Can we have the next slide? So it takes time. And trust me, when we were speaking in our office 15 years ago with the venture capital community, it was not easy to sell space with the business angels. So I would say our job that time was evangelisting, the evangelist of space investment. And it takes time until you really drop the message. And if you develop hardware, it takes time. If you develop moon rover, if you develop a rocket, if you develop a robot, hardware is hard, but it's really good. And I have later examples showing that. So don't expect that a tech transfer would come in a half a year. A tech transfer from space to non-space takes 3-4 years. And it takes even more than it grows. Next slide, please. We don't do that all alone. We do that with the world's largest space-related entrepreneurship network. And some dots are missing. So in Switzerland, we work with the ETH Zurich. In UK, we work with the Science Technology Facility Council, one of the largest research organizations there. In Germany, we work with Fraunhofer and DLR and Airbus. And some centers have their specialty. And I think Sarah will speak about what we do in terms of resources, and we're very proud to work our colleagues there and also supporting ESRIC in Luxembourg. So we take the best national partner and team that up, bringing that in Europe. And the average is about 220 startups we support every year, about 110 business cases, which comes from the SMEs across all the ESA member states. And also this is an offer to you because our part is limited. So when you want to work with the ESA Big, find one in Spain, in Portugal, in the UK, in Luxembourg, and team up with them. And this is a small portfolio of only 25 companies or 250 companies we have supported. Until now, we have supported over roughly 1,000 startups in our ecosystem. And when we're looking at that, it's all field. It's application, it's oil and gas, it's agriculture, it's mobility, it's rockets, everything. It's not up to us to set the market. It's up to the cases and the startup company, and we just add space to make it more powerful. Next click, please. We speak about, next slide, please. We speak about investment, and I take this, and this is only the German startups I have taken out. What we have learned, and this is the current situation, which is not like we had 15 years ago, to find 1 or 2 million euros is not the issue. If you do not find 1 or 2 million euros at the moment in Europe, sorry, you have the wrong business case or you're the wrong management team. And it's very easy how we select. We select like every VC does. Team, 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 business case, business model, and then we look to the technology. Where it's a little bit more harsh, and this you'll have to go Europe-wide, it's about the 10, 25 million cases where you need really bigger investment. Where it really becomes harder is the 50 million, where you either have to do an IPO or you need a really big lead investor. We have the first startup company, Lilium Aviation, which makes an electrical plane, which raised over 400 million, have a 1 billion euro evaluation, and they had really to go international. So I think we're pretty good in Europe, in the countries and within Europe, but really where it goes the big tickets, where they have the 100 million, which is really, really tough to raise. And this is something where we speak about launcher constellations, so you have to do it in steps. We from ESA, supporting that a little bit with our funding, the Commission supports that, and we have built over the last 15 years a worldwide network of investors where we have a good collaboration with and helping them also de-risking the cases. Next slide, please. There's a good saying in the mountains in Austria, when you go fishing, you have to take care that the worm is tasty for the fish, not for the fisher. And it's the other advice which I want to give, and our colleagues from Canada mentioned it also. Look really what the customer needs, the company, the startups, and the investor. At the moment, we look rather what our startups are needing because there's enough money on the market. However, in terms of product, it's the same. Not too much R&D. I would say nearly none of our startup companies have a problem with the technology. It's the business case where they need our help, and then to connecting with the prime and the first, second, third customers. So looking what is tasty, what is good for the fish, not for the fisher. Especially we as government organizations have the tendency to think, oh, that is good. But we have to really ask the customer outside the industry. Next slide, please. So there's an Irish saying, on the shoulders of the giants you see further. And I think in Brazil you have a great industry, you have a great venture industry, you have government funds. So what we have to be like parents, we have to let them, the cases, the startups, climbing on our shoulders because we are the giants and we help them to see further. So I think this network you have to build, and it's not only the space agencies, there's the entire industry, the entire organizations, you and your country and beyond you have. And I think you have it all. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. And then that's my favorite job title, which I still not have, but I still want to have. You need in every organization, not only in industry, but also in the space agency, in the community, the chief devil officer, who puts the finger into the wound and says, that is not right what we do. look very nice. It treats politicians. It's not paying off now. It pays off in 10 years, but we have to do it because it takes time to make a change. So really allow that you have the chief devil officer in the setup, especially when you build it up. You have to be a little bit the rebel to make things different, because this is what startups are doing. They're changing the game. They change the business model. Next slide, please. So there's no presentation without my kids, and I don't know of you who have kids. That's Lucas in the front and Johannes on the back. And supporting innovation in investing in startups, in investing in new space, upstream, downstream, across, doesn't matter. It's like raising kids. We have to love them. We have to give them the right surrounding. We give them sometimes a little bit money, and we give them good education. And this is what we do. It's not only about money. So it's really about the network. And this is the same like raising kids. So always we say we are the nice uncle or the aunt with the right address book and a little bit of money in the pocket, helping our nephews raising and become older. And when looking to their point, the only question if you're going to have a good Wi-Fi, because it's their problem. But also this we can manage by space because that's 5G from the satellite. Next slide, please. So I give you some examples. One of the success cases was Lilium Aviation. And they started with 4 boys having the dream to make competition to Airbus with an electrical flying car. Now remember our selection, because one of the board members in the selection, we have given them only a little bit of money. They said, oh, they want to do competition to the big guys, why we should support them. My answer was, if we do not support them, who else does? Our job is also to help the crazy ones. Our job is help the people which make the difference. And we have to help them to achieve that, or at least to de-risk to a certain moment and increase the likelihood of their success. Next slide, please. Another case is Clear Space, which is a fantastic one out of Switzerland. Spin-off from APFL, helped with the support of the ESA BIC in the ETH Zurich. They had only raised 500,000, 250 from our funding and 250 from early business angels. And they were beating for deorbiting spacecrafts, space debris. And they have won the tender against Airbus. And now this month they sign a 150 million euro contract with ESA. And this is the good news. And our colleague from Canada said that also. It's the decade of space. Startups have the chance now really to take and get these big contracts where space becomes more and more commercial. Next slide, please. So therefore, I would say if it's upstream or downstream, does not matter, but everybody can reach the stars. Next slide, please. You just have to add space. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Frank. I'm going to move swiftly on to Sarah because we're going to run out of time for questions otherwise. Sarah, if you can keep it under 10 minutes, we have a number of audience questions coming in.
All right. Please share my PowerPoint. While waiting before the PowerPoint is uploaded, I can quickly introduce myself. I'm here at the Luxembourg Space Agency and I'm responsible for all funding topics. So finance is actually my domain here in Luxembourg, and my main job is to strengthen this part of the ecosystem. So a lot of people might ask why Luxembourg and why Luxembourg in space. What a lot of people don't know that Luxembourg is actually one of the first birthplaces of commercial space. We supported a company called SES. SES nowadays is one of the leading satellite operators in the world. And that was in 1985. That was a big risk that the government took back then. We almost committed 79% of our annual government spending to support this startup in the 80s. So that was very unique in the times, especially when no one really understood why we need more than 5 TV channels or more radio channels in Luxembourg. So those were very, very interesting political discussion in parliament. Since then, we skyrocketed, and we're part of the space era in Europe. We joined ESA in 2005, becoming an ESA member. And then in 2016, our former minister in the economy, Minister Etienne Schneider, he basically introduced a new space initiative to diversify our economy. A lot of people know that Luxembourg is very, let's say, one of the key players in the financial world here in Europe. But in 2016, the government decided that we need to diversify and create new industries or strengthen existing industries. And this was the case where we said, okay, how about let's do a deep dive into space and announce our space resources initiative and our vision that we think in 10, 20 years, when humans will be living on the moon or on Mars long term, they have to use resources locally. We cannot afford to bring resources from Earth constantly to the moon to be able to live on the moon or in outer space. So what technologies are necessary, are needed to be able to survive in outer space sustainably? So that's kind of the vision that we introduced in 2016. It attracted a lot of attention and a lot of companies coming to Luxembourg, which then initiated the Luxembourg Space Agency. And our key role here is to really, create this fantastic ecosystem for startups to boost here, come here and grow and be one of the key players in the next future of space. So what do we do? We're very different than most of the space agencies out there. We really care about legal frameworks. We're also one of the first next to the US that introduced a space resources legal framework, allowing companies to go to the moon, for example, and utilize the space resources and make money out of it. So this was quite great, where a lot of governments actually laughed at us in the very beginning because they didn't understand what we're trying to do. But now I think most of them are actually following into our footsteps. Then the second thing that we do is, of course, international cooperation. We're a very small country, so we have to rely on international cooperation. We work together with very many other countries and space agencies. We signed just an MOU last year with the US, and actually last week it has been official that NASA appointed, also next to Canada, to be part of the Artemis mission, which we're very excited about. Then very major point is research and education. We support universities and also research entities to work further into space research and giving money in R&D efforts, which is our innovation and R&D funding schemes. And last but not least, further funding instruments, which is my domain. Now, through this initiative, and we're just 2 years old, we already have actually over 50 private and public actors within our space industry here in Luxembourg. So very proud. And if maybe some of you might recognize that almost half of the logos are startups, which we're very proud of. So we really like to consider ourselves as the space startup hub here in Europe and really push the commercial part of space. So what we care about, I'm just going to go through this very quickly. We do upstream and downstream, what actually Frank Salzgeber just mentioned beautifully in his presentation. So anything that has to do with satellite, telecommunication services, ground station development is a big one as well. Then satellite operations, which, one of them is SES that we have in the country is quite dominant in this area. Anything that has to do with data analytics, what can you do with the massive data that we're collecting through satellites? Robotics, very, very interesting things that we need and need to develop for outer space exploration and future habitats in space. Then cybersecurity, yeah. If anywhere there's data flowing around, this needs to be secured. Yeah, so finance. The very cool thing about Luxembourg is that we are already the hub for international finance within Europe, and now we're kind of combining that with space. So we see already a tendency of space funds moving to Luxembourg, which is great for our ecosystem, strengthening our ecosystem. We even have the European Investment Bank situated here. We're leading fund center in Europe, and we're trying to use that strength to also boost our financial part of our ecosystem. But I don't want to get into detail here yet. Maybe we can include that in our panel discussion. But one of our main instruments in space is really that we have a national R&D program through Lux Impulse. We utilize the benefits that we have being within Europe, so being part of the European Space Agency, benefits of Copernicus and the European Commission, and using their instruments for our companies. Then we create new instruments. So beginning of the year, we created a early stage space fund that is really dedicated to invest into companies, ticket size 500,000 to maybe 10 million, orbital ventures. And the beauty is that they don't only invest into Luxembourg, but also internationally. Because here again, Luxembourg, we believe in that we need to strengthen the space community in general worldwide. Then we have New Space Capital, which is a growth stage fund, also newly launched here in Luxembourg. Then we have other cooperations with our banks here, with European Investment Bank and our National Investment Bank, SNCI. Yeah, so this is a quick overview of LSA and looking forward to the panel.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And thanks again to all of you for your presentations. So let's jump right into it. We got a few questions from the audience, a lot of which touch the same topic. So I'm going to try to do my best here to paraphrase and summarize them. There have been a few questions around the availability of financing for Brazilian space startups. And I can, from my own experience, say there's not a whole lot right now, but this is the same experience other countries have gone through. Obviously, as Sarah just mentioned, Luxembourg simply went down the route of basically doing a public-private partnership and creating their own venture capital fund, which is one way to do that. I'm not sure that's going to happen in Brazil, to be honest. I found it interesting what Angelina mentioned, that you are starting to have dialogue, systematic dialogue with investors in Canada. So if you could maybe give us 1 or 2 minutes of any sort of lessons learned from the beginnings of that initiative, that would be great.
So from the perspective of our investors, so the story that where we started. So I would like to, you all know about that, but of course, a lot of investments, private investments into space happen with our southern neighbor. So what was happening in Canada, that many of the Canadian companies were going to the United States to look for the investor. And many of the Canadian investors were going to United States to look for an interesting startup where they can invest and where they can find this incredible growth opportunity for their investments. So this is where we started this conversation and looking into this problem, how we can connect our domestic talent with our domestic investors, because both are looking for the same thing, but to find those solutions, they go to the United States. So from the original conversations with all of the investors, they simply did not know about the talent and startups and bright ideas that companies are developing here in Canada. So essentially the investment pitches were going to the wrong ears. And this is where the government was able to step in and to introduce two industries literally in our own backyard, to introduce them to each other. And that was the great start, what I hope will be the long-term friendship, to paraphrase the movie. But essentially, that's what starts the conversation. What is important for investors is to have some sort of encouragement from the space agency in terms of validation of the technology. We're not really sure yet how to do that in the official way, in the official format. And we're looking for different instruments, how to develop that. However, for every investor, what is important is understanding that the space agency is behind this company and behind this technology and can give assurance that this specific technology is indeed important and is indeed destructive technology, in terms of that it will be disruptive technology rather, and it will change the industry or the product offer within a subsegment of the space industry. So that's something that we are learning from these conversations with the investment industry. The other interesting aspect is that, of course, investors are looking how to offload risks and how they can share risks. And one of the ways is possibly working with one of the government organizations where government investment can be matched by the private investment, dollar to dollar. So essentially, this is how we can help the investors to reduce the risks of initial investment and to encourage them to step into these investments. I'm not sure if Sarah is doing the same thing with the venture capital hub in Luxembourg, if the private money are matched with government money, and basically to achieve the same effect of reduced risks for the early stage investors. I would be really interested to find out if you are following the same path.
Yeah, thank you, Angelina. I think I want to pick up on one thing you mentioned, which is very interesting, which is that aspect of space as a deep tech industry and having some sort of validation for investors who are normally generalist investors. And this sounds a little bit to me like something that happens, for example, in the ESA business incubation centers, because if a company is accepted in an ESA BIG, I think people make the assumption that there is some sort of validation being done. And so I want to talk a little bit about that idea of having space-specific incubators. And I know Sarah in Luxembourg is also working on a space-specific incubators. So maybe first Frank and then Sarah, what do you think about the idea of having a space-focused incubator in a country like Brazil? You're on mute, I think, Frank.
I think it was 6 years ago when the Fund of Brazil and the Aviation Fund was visiting ESTEC. So, of course, Brazil should have that. It's up to Brazil to team up with Luxembourg, to team up with other incubation centers in Europe. You have the Fund, you have the aviation funds, not only one, so you have the industry. So, and I want to break a little bit also for what Sarah said. When Luxembourg supported SAS, they were giving the pension fund as a guarantee for that startup SAS. So that's pretty cool. So you need also government to support that. So it's up to the Brazilian government to support it and to make it happen. So and we have so many. 15 years ago it might be more difficult, or 20 years, but nowadays if you not support startups, space is becoming the backbone of our digital economy. And either you're part of it or you're not part of it. I'm not talking about resources, because that is even more clever and looking more long term. But teaming up with a specialized ESA incubation center, and our survival rate after 5 years of our 1,000 startup companies is 86%. They don't have a technology problem. They come out of the best universities we have in Europe. So it's a business model which is normally striking, and then the venture funding on the later stage. So of course, helping de-risking is something, but you need also the companies investing. And ESA Aerospace, Sarah knows this company, the building is a 100-man or women company out of Munich, one of the fastest growing startups in Germany at the moment. They received, I think, 30 million. And one of the investors, I was praying for 13 years to invest in space, and now he's a happy man. So sometimes it takes time, but you have to make them part of the game.
Thanks, Frank. Sarah, is there something you want to add on that topic from your experience of thinking about setting up the incubator in Luxembourg?
Yeah, totally. Well, the incubator is not there yet, so fingers crossed that it's going to be launched Q1 next year. But so like Luxembourg, we already have, let's say, our national incubator that is focused on space. And this incubator that we're setting up at the moment is very special because it will be aligned with the European Space Resources Innovation Center, which we're going to announce pretty soon. It's not 100% official yet, but it has been announced in the media already. So it's safe for me to mention this. So the new incubator, which is going to be within the European Space Resources Innovation Center, follows the same vision that I kind of touched upon in my presentation before, that Luxembourg has the grand vision how we're going to live in outer space, outside of Earth, how we're going to use resources locally outside of Earth to make space more sustainable. And these are very, very long shot ideas. These are like literally moonshot ideas. But we in Luxembourg, we think it's very essential now that we have to support any startup that has the same grant vision as Luxembourg does, to support them within this incubator. So this incubator will be a little bit different. It's not going to be like a 1 year incubation, but it's rather going to be 5 years. So startups really have time to develop their really, I would say, tough tech within these 5 years. We take the risk, we give them the money, we allow them to, you know, work on their idea for 5 years. And then hopefully their technology is so cool that also not only the space community will use them and become customers, but also terrestrial applications. So we really want to, you know, make the link and really drive the demand from the terrestrial industries as well, matching topics that are linked to the same space problems that we have. So there are quite many examples. I don't know if I should go into detail because I can talk more and more about it, but this is like the short answer to that.
And within 1 second, I have to add, Sarah, you don't create also new incubators. So our colleagues in Luxembourg work with Technoport, and Diego is the CEO of Technoport, and I know him for 15 years. He's doing a fantastic job in other areas. So don't create something new. Use what you have already there and just add space.
Exactly, that's
totally
like beautifully said. So yeah, so really use your local, let's say, superheroes and bring them together. That's like, I think that's what governments should do.
And there's really, I agree, Frank, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There's fantastic incubation and acceleration programs worldwide. And in fact, just before jumping on to this call, and a shout out to our Canadian friends, since we have Angelina off, I was on a call with the Creative Destruction Lab in Toronto, chaired by Chris Hatfield, which is a fantastic incubator and accelerator. But I wanted to pick up on something here which was mentioned, which is, I think, Sarah, you mentioned that you also want to include terrestrial industry afterwards. And that to me also resonates in Brazil, because we have some world-beating companies in Brazil in sectors like agriculture, even in insurance, oil and gas, mining, and so forth. Are there any lessons learned with regard to working with industry and getting them involved in the space sector? I'm going to look at Frank, because I know ESA has had a lot of these types of activities.
Yeah, we work with everybody. If it's oil and gas, if it's agriculture, BayWa, nobody knows it, but they just bought, I think 3 years ago, the biggest seed producer in South America. If it's aviation, if it's automotive, if it's Volkswagen, it's just another customer. This is what I said with the giants. And I think you in Brazil, you have a lot of giants. So team them up, because in innovation, there are only two pathways: involve or die out. And trust me, you cannot cheat nature and evolution. A tree who stopped to grow has started to die. So if they want to have an innovation future, they should team up with the startups. And space is, as Angelina says, is on the moving part. Earth observation is used by Münchner Rück, Allianz, AXA, and everybody by the reinsured. This is standard for them. All the oil and gas companies are just out of a call. This is the reason why late. They have their own subgroup for Earth observation. They have huge teams. It's part of the game. So you can ignore it, which is maybe not so clever, or you just say you adapt it and you get the innovation from the outside in. And this is what governments like Luxembourg is doing.
If I may add, what is interesting is that at some point every company will have space data or space services as part of its business. It will just like become a regular activity, with no longer being on a geeky activity, a geeky industry, and disconnected from the economy. Every company will have a space component, a space-based data or sensors. It's just the way that history is moving forward.
Yes. Good. Well, we're running out of time here. Thank you so much, guys. I think we've had some really interesting takeaway here. You know, one of the takeaways would be really that we have to continue to force this dialogue about space, you know, educate people like stakeholders, like investors and non-space corporates about space. And if we do that, if we continue to doing that, that will in the end help us to build the space startup and build the entire space ecosystem. And of course, that is one big point of having a conference like the Space Forum. So in that sense, thank you very much, Maxime, Frank, Angelina, Sarah. It's been a pleasure as always. And yeah, good to see you.
Thank you so much, and looking forward for any collaboration.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to work with you.
Bye, guys.
Bye, bye.
Bye.
Vocês acompanharam então o último painel de hoje do Fórum da Indústria Espacial Brasileira. A programação continua amanhã. Os detalhes, você sabe aí, estão todos no nosso site.
O Grupo Energy Telecom, através de suas 4 empresas, atua em todo o Brasil, integrando os principais serviços e soluções quando pensamos em tecnologia. Projetos de Public Cloud, comunicação unificada, Big Data, infraestrutura, Data Center, Client License, Cybersecurity e educação. Você pode contar com o Grupo Energy Telecom. Sempre a melhor solução.
Nós protegemos a tecnologia para você explorar novas realidades. Fazer o que quiser, quando quiser. Fazer amigos virtuais. Estar perto, mesmo estando longe. E conquistar novas fronteiras. Garantimos sua segurança digital para um futuro melhor. Kaspersky. Bring on the future.
Vale do Paraíba, uma região única com múltiplas vocações. A nossa é a tecnologia, é a inovação. Nós somos a NIP-BR. Trabalhamos para integrar, conectar, expandir, informar, entreter. A NIP-BR é solução corporativa, é internet, TV por assinatura, é telefonia digital. Os melhores serviços com o melhor custo-benefício. NIP-BR, sua melhor opção em internet, telefonia e TV por assinatura.
Você é daqueles que acham que ser moderno é ter um aplicativo para cuidar do seu dinheiro? É também. Agora, moderno mesmo é fazer parte de um grupo de pessoas que cooperam e crescem juntas.
Tem gente que acha que um bom atendimento é ter um gerente pronto para te ajudar. Nada mal, né? Mas pra gente ter voz e participar das decisões relacionadas ao nosso dinheiro.
Tem gente que acha que somos um banco. Somos muito mais. Somos feitos de valores.
Our infrastructure and natural resources can't keep up with growing demands. We need to be smarter. We need to care more. It's time to create smart infrastructure. We can because we connect energy systems, buildings, and industries to adapt and evolve the way we live and work for the good of the planet and the people. Creating environments that care. Smart infrastructure from Siemens.
A maior rede de pesquisas do mundo, com 5,5 bilhões de acessos por dia. Uma rede social avaliada em 70,7 milhões. Sabe qual a semelhança entre essas empresas? O investimento em softwares e algoritmos inteligentes. Tinova e SPS.
Na era da transformação digital, a Tria Software é o seu parceiro ideal. Trabalhamos com a aplicação de solução em software padronizada ou sob medida para melhorar o desempenho dos processos de sua empresa. Tria Software.